All right, we're recording part 2 for our medical ethics class. And I just want to say a word. So I took this class on medical ethics a long time ago. And so my ability to explain some of these concepts is a little rusty. So again, if you ever have questions, if you ever encounter something in ministry and you're just really not exactly sure what to do, don't hesitate to go to your pastor. I say that's probably the first person to go to, right? If your pastor doesn't really seem to know, because all priests get some education in medical ethics. If your pastor doesn't know the answer or you don't feel satisfied with the answer, you can always email me, ask a question, you can call me, or someone else in the Archdiocese. If there's somebody else the Archdiocese would recommend, that's totally fine. If you go to the internet looking for answers, again, the Catholic, National Catholic Bioethics Center, brain went blank there for a second, go to their website. They have a lot of like question and answer type of sections. I want to just review one thing from the last video. So I mentioned about advanced care directives. If you go onto their website, they have an advanced care directive that they put together that is very Catholic and it's very thorough. It's probably 5 times more thorough than something you would get like at a hospital. And it's more, in my opinion, it's more for someone who really takes their faith seriously and wants to understand those things. So I had a whole bunch of them. I've been looking for them and I can't seem to find them now. That was from years ago. But they have some advanced care directives if you were interested in seeing that. Okay? All right, so we did the introduction. We talked about patient care. A lot of it was on the rights of the patient. Now we're going to talk about authority. Now you also probably see that I'm not going in the same order as the ethical and religious directives document. I changed the order around just a little bit, okay? All right, the authority section is kind of a short section. If you're ever questioning or wondering who in the end is responsible and has the authority for what our Catholic hospitals do in terms of ethical decisions that they have to make, it is always the bishop of the diocese, okay? Most bishops, I would say, are very good about either consulting with the National Catholic Bioethics Center or having some people on their staff who are proficient in these things. But the bishop is the one ultimately in the end who is responsible and has final authority. So if you're ever in the hospital, you're working with a hospital and you don't feel maybe satisfied or you're not quite sure if everything is going the way it's supposed to be going, the bishop is the one who in the end has the authority. And to not hesitate if you need to or if you feel concerns, to write a letter to the archbishop and say, hey, what is the situation with this particular hospital or whatever it may be, okay? All right, so in the end, very simple. If you notice in the ERDs, it said it over and over, the bishop is the one with the final authority, okay? Now, in the ethical and religious directives, the document you read, it was very, very clear that every Catholic institution must follow the directives, okay? There is no flexibility there. There is no options there. They must follow those directives. So if you do encounter something that's not kosher, that's not with what the directives say, then that is a moment where you could contact the archbishop and say they're not following the directives. Okay? So those directives carry authority. It is ultimately the bishop's responsible, though, to implement them and to enforce them if need be, right? Okay. Every hospital has or should have an ethics committee. So again, if you're working with a particular hospital, you can consult with their ethics committee. Personally, from my experience, I don't have 100% confidence in the decisions that some ethics committees have made. And I'm not always 100% confident that they actually are following the church's teachings 100%. And so if you ever come in a situation where you feel that, so for example, you have a family in the hospital, you have a person in the hospital, the family's working with the hospital, they contact you asking for some help. You find out that they're already talking to their ethics committee. It generally has to do with a decision on whether they should provide nutrition and hydration. It usually has to do with an end-of-life issue. And maybe you feel like that ethics committee's decision was not necessarily in conformity with the directives. Again, then to be able to present that to the archdiocese, to the archbishop, okay? If you had serious concerns there. But generally speaking, the ethics committees, hopefully you'll find that they follow the directives and they are a good resource for families. So typically the purpose of the ethics committee is to help families make good decisions in a hospital environment. Okay? All right. Once again, if you ever find yourself in in a situation where you're struggling to know what's the right thing, I actually had something come up not too long ago. It was something new because we had never talked about this when I was taking the class. And there's an acronym, and I don't remember what the acronym is, but basically what it is there are hospice care centers that are providing like a third option, if you will, for people who want to die. So one of the options is just physician-assisted suicide. That's where they're prescribed drugs, they take the drugs, and the patient dies from taking those drugs, right? Well, this option is where it's not physician-assisted, but it's assisted starvation, where basically the patient says, look, I don't want to take those drugs, I don't want to do that. Or maybe the patient's not capable of taking those drugs, but they want to die, so they want to commit suicide. So what they do is they just don't feed them. So they withdraw nutrition, hydration, anything like that. And then they give them drugs as palliative care to ease the suffering. And so basically it's so that it's not painful for them to starve themselves to death. But it is suicide. It's a deliberate choice, and then the medical personnel support the patient in basically starving themselves to death. So they're not dying. The patient's not dying. Their body can do everything it's supposed to do. They've just given up, right? So things like that. I had a family come to me and they're like, "Can they do that?" Now this was not. No, I take that back. Is this a Catholic institution? Anyways, I don't remember. But the family was just really, really troubled by them presenting that option to their family member. I don't think, this wasn't a Catholic institution. Anyways, I don't think it was. So I learned that. It's like, oh man, all right. Okay, we're moving on now to cooperation. So this is cooperation. Obviously, cooperation is normally a really good thing, right? This is cooperation with evil. Now, to someone who's an idealist, you say, well, why would we ever cooperate with evil? Why would we do that, right? We should never cooperate with evil. The reality is, we cooperate with evil every single day on some level. So, for example, you go into the store. I challenge you to go into a store that is not in some ways benefiting from selling something that is contrary to our faith, right? Whether it's birth control, whether it's, well, that's probably the big one. They sell all kinds of birth control or pornography or whatever it may be. And so when we shop there, we in some ways are cooperating with an institution that has chosen to do something evil, to sell something that is evil, okay? So there's an element of cooperation in that. Now, we may not support it, we may not be purchasing those items or those things, but nonetheless there's an element of cooperation. So in medical ethics, generally this applies to institutions where a Catholic institution is purchasing materials or purchasing things from another institution, or working as a partner with another institution that's doing something contrary to our beliefs. Okay? So that's cooperation. Now, there's formal cooperation. Formal cooperation is something, when it has to do with evil, is something that we can never do. Okay? So you have formal cooperation, and then you have material cooperation. Okay? But formal cooperation is our presence is necessary for them to do the evil. And so we can never put ourselves in that situation where our presence is necessary in order for them to do the evil. So for example, let's say you have a doctor who's working at the Catholic hospital, and now they're partnering with this other hospital. So we can never share resources with that other institution in order to do an abortion per se, which would be something else. So that doctor would be necessary, if you will, in that procedure, and therefore we can never cooperate in that manner. That might be a bad example, but it's the idea that we would be cooperating in a pretty direct manner, that evil could not occur if we were not participating in it. So we can never, ever do that. Okay? And that's why when a Catholic hospital begins to form a relationship with a non-Catholic entity, generally the bishop gets involved with the NCBC to discuss what that's going to look like. Because there can be no level of formal cooperation with any evil that's being done by the other institution. Okay? All right. Material cooperation is kind of like a step down. Material cooperation, and it gets really complicated, so do not assume that what I'm presenting here is all of it. If you want more information on this cooperation, I can send you some information. Just email me and I can scan the documents I have on this, because it gets a little complicated. It gets very complicated, actually. Material cooperation is where we do not share the intention, nor do we participate in the act of the evil. We do not intend the evil, nor do we participate in the evil. Okay? So again, it's like you go to the store, you're going to buy something. You don't buy something that's bad, even though they're selling it, right? And so there's a level of cooperation by going to that business, but you're not intending for them to do something bad, nor are you participating in them selling that bad. Okay, so in a medical institution, it would be the same thing, that if we have a cooperation that's established, we can never be intending to do any of the evil, nor acting in any direct way. Okay? All right. I wrote down some examples, and I'm trying to think. An example would be abortion, and that is, well, okay, let me go to the two types of material cooperation first. So you have immediate and mediate. So you have immediate and mediate. Immediate cooperation is not formal cooperation, but it would still be necessary for the person, it would still be necessary for the institution or whatever it is to do what they're doing in order for the other organization to accomplish its evil. Okay? So there's still a level of necessity there. And so that's very problematic. We normally can never, I'm not sure there's any exceptions to this, but we cannot do that, where our presence is necessary for the evil to happen. It's not formal cooperation where it's as direct, but there's still examples where there's still some level of necessity of participating in order for that act to occur. Mediate is where our presence is not necessary, and that's more in the realm of where we work. When, let's say, a Catholic institution is partnering with another institution, we are not participating nor are we intending any of the evil they're doing. Our presence is not necessary for them to do it, but there still is on some level a partnership between these two organizations. Okay? All right. These things are not as urgent in terms of your care with like patients in the hospital or families. But you will have people in your parish who work for organizations where they begin to partner with another organization, or they begin to do things that are evil, and your parishioner may come to you and say, well, what am I supposed to do? And that's where the questions of, well, what is your role in this? Is your role formal? Is it necessary and direct, right? Or is it less direct but on still some level necessary, or has nothing to do with it? So again, I can think of an example is somebody says, well, I work for Amazon, right? Well, Amazon sells things that are very contrary to our faith, right? But the person is going to work in their warehouse or something, and their presence is not necessarily necessary for the evil that's, again, it gets complicated. I get myself confused on this. So parishioners may come to you with medical, saying they work for a company that does medical research, and they're using cells from aborted fetuses, right? And it really bothers them that they're doing that. So sometimes we have to take that into account. Now, in something really complicated like that, again, I use them as a resource. Okay? All right. So, but mediate is where the presence is not necessary for the evil, and so that's generally where we find ourselves trying to get to if we're ever going to cooperate with an organization that's doing evil. Okay, the last point on this is the element of scandal. Okay? So, scandal is taking into account what other people see and hear, and whether or not they're going to be scandalized by seeing some level of cooperation. So you may have gotten a situation where you're comfortable with it, that it's not violating any of the church's teachings, nobody's participating directly in any evil. But the way it appears to others, because they may not understand all the circumstances, it looks like we're doing this, okay? And so you have to be really careful about scandal that it can cause. So let's say you have an organization that's known for doing something really bad. So Planned Parenthood is known for doing abortions. They're known for providing birth control. So you're not going to find the Catholic Church partnering with them, even if it has nothing to do with those two things, because of the element of scandal, right? Okay. So it's being very concerned about that. We have to navigate those waters, what perceptions are. Now, I also want to say that we don't want to overdo that. We want to be reasonable about it. Okay? All right. All right. We're going to move on. I think I'm just going to keep moving on with this video, and then at some point I think I'll stop it and then for a third video. I think there'll be 3 videos. Okay? So we're going to move on to beginning of life issues, okay? So the two areas where we apply medical ethics most frequently is beginning of life issues and end of life issues, okay? So a very basic principle. So you can break down medical ethics into really two or three really basic principles. One is, it is never ever permissible to intentionally kill innocent human life, right? Because that impacts a lot of the beginning of life issues and all of the end of life issues, pretty much, right? Okay. The other basic principle is that life begins at conception. Life begins at the moment of conception, okay? So that's important to keep that in mind when we talk about beginning of life issues. There are some issues that we're going to talk about, though, that actually go before life has even begun. And that's when we're going to talk about contraception, right? The act of trying to prevent conception. But life begins at the moment of conception. So if we begin to talk about taking a human life, that's where we begin. Okay, we don't go later than that. Human life begins at the moment of conception. So no matter what words they're using, like a zygote or embryo or fetus or baby, all of that is human life. So don't get thrown off by medical terminology. It's all human life. Okay? All right. The rule about never intentionally killing innocent human life is a moral absolute. There are no circumstances where it is permissible. In the press, sometimes politicians will say, well, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but in cases of rape or incest, I believe it should be legal, right? And from the perspective of a church, we say it is never right or good to try to correct one evil by permitting another evil. So the rape doesn't get corrected, or the incest doesn't get corrected by killing the child. Murder doesn't correct the evil that has happened, right? Okay. There's ways in those moments, there's ways in those situations to pastorally care for the person and to really help them, but at the same time to not help them make the wrong decisions, right? Decisions that would end up leading to the death of a child. So we're going to start with before life even begins. We're going to talk a little bit about contraception. Contraception versus abortifacients. All right, so an see if I know how to spell this. My spelling is really bad. Abortifacient. I think that's how you spell it. Abortifacient. I might be way wrong on that. And contraceptives, okay? So a contraceptive, in its correct understanding, is something that prevents conception. It's something that prevents the sperm and the egg from coming together and forming a unique human being, right? From forming the embryo. So there can be methods like barrier methods, like condoms, things like that. There's also, many of them are chemical methods. And so whether it's the pill or whether they're implants, but they're devices that implant chemicals into the woman's body that by and large what they do is they convince the woman's body that she's already pregnant, and therefore it stops the eggs from being sent down. So in a sense it stops her period from happening, right? It stops the cycle because the body thinks it's pregnant. And so most of the chemical contraceptives operate in that mode. So if no egg is being provided, then no conception will occur. Now, with the chemicals, though, they are not just contraceptives, because they also have other effects. So they're designed that if conception does occur, it tries to create it so that the uterus of the woman is a hostile environment, so that the embryo will not be able to implant itself in the uterus. And so the chemicals in those contraceptives actually then become abortifacients, which means they're designed to cause an abortion. It's very early on in the pregnancy. I mean, we're talking matters of days or weeks rather than months, but it's designed to expel the embryo. Okay? So most of the chemicals, like the common pill that's taken by women or implants, they are abortifacients as well as contraceptives. Okay? A lot of people don't know that. Because a lot of people think, well, I don't see the big deal. Some people say, I don't see the big deal about contraceptives. But as soon as you start telling them about abortifacients, they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that it was designed to kill these babies, right? These little embryos. Okay. There was something else I was about to say on that, and then I forgot what it was. Oh, there's another Plan B. So Plan B, I believe now in Washington State, is an over-the-counter drug. I'm pretty sure this is something that's taken when a woman thinks that she might have gotten pregnant, so it's like the next day. So it is designed not to be a contraceptive, but to be an abortifacient, right? So if you hear something like Plan B, it is absolutely not permitted. Well, even if it was a contraceptive, it is not permitted to be used. It is designed to kill the embryo, to expel the embryo. All right? Now, sometimes people will ask, because like the common pill can be used for other reasons. It's not necessarily just used for temporary sterilization or as a contraceptive. Women will take it to regulate their cycle, and in those situations, we enter into something that we call the principle of double effect. Okay, the principle of double effect. This is where a person is taking some medication for something that is totally good and permissible to correct something that's not right with the body, an infirmity with the body. But there is a secondary effect that is not desired. So if somebody comes to you and says, Father, can I take the pill to regulate my cycle? What I ask them is, well, no, are you doing this also as a contraceptive? And if they say absolutely not, I'm not sexually active or whatever, I'm not doing it for that, then it falls under the principle of double effect, where if it were to be a contraceptive, if it were to do those things, it is not desired, right? It is not intended, but is a secondary effect that does happen. Now, for the principle of double effect, the good that comes from it needs to be proportionally more than the bad that comes from it, right? Okay. All right. So it is permissible for somebody to take a form of medication that may have a secondary effect that acts as a contraceptive, but when that's not necessarily the intent. So another example would be a hysterectomy. A hysterectomy results in permanent sterilization, but that's a secondary effect. The intention is to correct something that's wrong with the body, or to preserve for integrity of the body. Certain organs are removed for the health of the whole, right? And that is considered permissible, okay? The other form of contraceptives here is permanent sterilization, right? So permanent sterilization is a vasectomy or tubal ligation, tying of the tubes. Yeah. So those are not to be done ever when the intent is sterilization, right? Sometimes it's really heartbreaking. A couple will come to you and let's say the health of the woman is such that it would be very dangerous for her to get pregnant again. And so the doctor's telling her, look, you need to have a tubal ligation because this is really dangerous if you get pregnant again. And so the couple comes to you and says, well, can I do this because it's dangerous? And if the intent is to cause sterilization, the answer is always no. Now, what do you do with a situation like that? So, I want to give a thought on this. A long time ago, I had a couple in this situation, and one of the members of the couple said, when I told them that they couldn't do that, they said, why are you making fertility more important than my wife's health? And you'll probably hear that at some point, right? Why is the church's teaching, why is it making fertility more important than the life of my wife, whose life could be endangered? And the reality is that we're not. But what we're doing is we're saying that if the couple desires to just have sexual relations, but change the purpose of those sexual relations so that it's not actually marital nor unitive nor procreative, right? Then what we're saying is that is not more important than the life of your wife. In other words, what we're saying is your ability to have sex is not more important than your wife's life. And that's where the couple needs to talk about living in permanent continence. In other words, abstaining from sexual relations, right? And then if at some point the situation changes or the couple feels like they're open to it, they can always have sexual relations, and if God wills, they can have a child. But what we're saying is that there are other options where sex is not the highest good in the relationship. And the reality is, if we're talking about the life of a person, then abstinence really is the only 100% guarantee to not result in the conception of a child. It's known that in some cases, vasectomies or tubal ligations actually fail and conception occurs. Or other forms, implants, things like that, they fail and then conception occurs, right? So it opens the door to a conversation around abstinence. And you know, a lot of couples, if you're afraid to go down that path with couples, I would say is do not assume that they believe that they cannot live abstinence. A lot of couples, when they grow spiritually, realize that that can be an act of love. Now remember, in love, any act that is a sacrifice, in other words, it's done out, there's some suffering involved, but it's done out of love for another, can be redemptive. It can produce beautiful fruit, including in a marriage. Okay? All right. So I just wanted to kind of offer some advice on that one, where people give some really difficult scenarios. And you have to kind of take them in and say, we need to go deeper with this and look at what is most critical in the relationship, as well as at being faithful to the church's teachings. All right? Okay. There's another issue that can be very difficult. You know what? I feel like this video is going already kind of long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it right here. Okay. So this is part 1, if you want to call it, a beginning of life issues. And then in the next video, I will pick up with the second half of the beginning of life issues, and then we'll move on to end of life issues. Okay? All right, so God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.